Hey everybody, Chris here doing another installation of poolside perfumes. If you are new here, I've been doing a kind of a fun, at least I think it's fun, casual, more laid back format for talking about perfumes. Whereas I decided about 10 minutes ago I was going to do a video. I grabbed a bunch of perfumes. I thought about a topic and I'm here to have some fun talking about perfumes outside. It's actually 91 degrees and I don't really doesn't feel that hot. Normally I'm wearing some sort of hat, but I've got an umbrella perched right next to me, and today is a video about fragrances that I purchased because I smelled them on somebody else. And I actually got this idea from a friend of mine, a lovely person I met through YouTube last year. Her name is Lene. She used to have a YouTube channel. She doesn't do it anymore. She's kind of moved on. She now has a successful career as a flight attendant. But she did this video maybe 2 years ago, and I really loved it because I have several perfumes sitting next to me in a box that I purchased because I smelled them on somebody and I knew that I wanted them. Now, a good portion of these fragrances are actually marketed to men. Fragrances I smelled on somebody else, another man, and I wanted to buy it for my significant other at the time. So I've got at least 4 or 5 fragrances maybe that are marketed towards men. And I've got some really vintagey old ones that I don't wear anymore, and fragrances that I wear on a pretty frequent basis. So hopefully you'll get a kick out of it and allow me to kind of walk down memory lane as we talk about these. I'm just gonna grab in my box and go. And the first one, I know that it's a Creed fragrance because I can tell by the bottle and I'm looking at it. This one to me gets so much hate on YouTube and social media. I see this fragrance getting trashed all the time, but I'm telling you, and it's marketed towards men, and it is the king of fragrances, Creed Aventus. I'm one of those people that thinks that this smells amazing. Let me tell you something. There are a handful of instances in my entire life where I have tracked down a man and asked them what they were wearing because they smelled so good, and I wanted to get that fragrance for my boyfriend or husband at the time. 3 of the 5 times it was this fragrance right here, Creed Aventus. I remember specifically every time I stalked somebody. The first time was in Costco. I was in like the wheat aisle, the grain aisle, and I could smell this amazing aroma. And I looked around, there was nobody in my aisle, but if you know Costco, you know you can kind of see through the different aisles. I could see there was like the body of a man in the aisle over, and I thought, oh my gosh, is that a men's cologne? Because I will tell you, I think for many years, particularly up until like maybe the past 20 years, men's fragrances were terrible. When I was in high school and college, there wasn't a whole lot of things that smelled nice for boys to wear. Fragrances didn't start getting good until the 2000s, in my opinion. And I actually thought most men's fragrances didn't smell very good. The fragrances of the past that like all men wore were like Dracar Noir, Polo Ralph Lauren. Back to Costco. I swing around to the next aisle and I casually walk by this man. He's the only one in the aisle. And I walk by him and I'm like, yep, it's him. He's wearing something that smells great. And I asked him what he was wearing, and he told me Creed Aventus. And at that time, I don't know, it was probably a decade ago, I'd never heard of it before. And so I remember thinking, oh, well, I had known about the House of Creed. My very first niche fragrance was from the House of Creed, and I'll talk about that fragrance in a minute. So I remember thinking, oh, I got to write that name down. Now, fast forward maybe a year or so, I am in downtown Chicago. I'm there for a conference. It is bitter cold. It's December. It's freezing cold. I'm walking the streets of Chicago at night and I smell this amazing fragrance. I smell this amazing aroma. I know it's a fragrance. I know it's a cologne. It's probably a man's cologne. And I smell it and I look ahead of me about maybe 25 yards in front of me. There's a guy walking and I kind of hurried up and I tapped him on the shoulder. He had like earphones in. And I said, excuse me, sir, you smell so good. Do you mind if I ask what you're wearing? And he said, it's Creed Aventus. And the last time was in Whole Foods. And after that, I decided that was it. I was going to get a bottle for my spouse. And luckily at the time, I was in downtown Chicago in December, and Neiman Marcus typically has a really good sale. I want to say it's the first week of December. It's like $50 off of $200. So I kind of bit the bullet and I went and bought Pat a bottle of Creed Aventus. and he absolutely loved it. And it was basically his signature scent for several years, and to this day, when he wears it, I think he smells so great. And this is his second bottle, and it's just, you know, I think it's known for its pineapple and cedar. It's a masterpiece. It's another masterpiece in my opinion. I'm one of those people, I'm not sick of it yet, and I'm so glad that I had smelled it on someone else so that I had the opportunity to get that for a family member. So the next one, I'm gonna admit, this is a fragrance that I do not wear a whole lot. The first time I smelled it, and it is Dior Addict. And the first time that I smelled it, I was at kind of like my husband Pat happens to be a surgeon, and he was training at the time. He was in surgical training, and at the end of the year, they get all the fellows, the residents together, and put on a little dinner at one of the attendings' house. And I was his girlfriend at the time, so I went along, and we went over to this couple's house, and I met the wife, and all of a sudden I was just met kabammy in the face with a very strong fragrance. And I remember asking her what she was wearing because I wanted to make sure I never bought it. It was just too strong for me. And she said very proudly that it was Dior Addict. And I thought, oh, that's not the fragrance for me. It wasn't until maybe 10 years later that I smelled it again, and I thought it just appealed to me more, and I still appreciated the fragrance for what it was, or what it is. I think it's very unique. It's a wonderful, timeless fragrance. If you've never smelled it, it is a very strong green vanilla. It is a vanillic white floral with a strong green note, whether that's neroli or petitgrain, but it's 100% recognizable. Loads of white florals in here. I know there's lily. I definitely smell lily. I think there's mandarin in here. And it smells good to me, but I just never reach for it. I absolutely don't reach for it in the warmer months. This thing is a powerhouse. To me, this is a woman in a A-line leather skirt, stilettos, and a button-down who is just all business. You do not want to get in her way. And that's usually not me. But every once in a while in the winter, I will get the urge to wear this. I don't have that many green vanillas. I can think off the top of my head. I have Angelique Noir, and I have this. And Angelique Noir is my favorite green vanilla. This one is a little too strong for me, but still a classic, and I purchased it because I smelled it on somebody else. Maybe it wasn't a love at first sniff, but it's certainly, I think, it's a great addition to my collection. It's a real classic. It's a timeless classic. To spice things up, I brought a bunch of different sunglasses. Gonna keep you guys on your toes here. So the next one, there was somebody at my workplace who I don't normally work with. She was a consultant, and I thought, oh my gosh, she smells so amazing. I asked her what she was wearing, and she told me Chanel No. 5 Eau Premiere, but it was the body cream. All she was wearing was the body cream, and it was so strong. And I thought she smelled so amazing. And it wasn't that much later that I got a magazine, and in the magazine they have the little scent strips. I smelled it and I thought, I love that. I want it for Christmas. And I think that was the fragrance I asked for that year for Christmas. In my opinion, this is a modern take on Chanel No. 5. The original, the OG, isn't really up my alley. It is a little too much for me, but Eau Premiere is a more modern take on Chanel No. 5. The aldehydes are toned way down. It's more powdery, and it is a little bit more modern, in my opinion. A modern take on the fragrance. It still has the classic florals of Chanel, and the Eau Premiere is not quite as strong as Chanel No. 5. I like to say that Chanel No. 5, the original, is kind of the outside voice, whereas the Eau Premiere, this is the inside voice version. I'll wear this maybe 5-10 times a year. I love it. This is my second bottle. It's really a classic, even though I don't wear it as much as I used to because my fragrance collection has gotten a little bit large. This isn't going anywhere. This is a classic staple, will always be in my collection. The next one was actually my scent of the day today, and it is Good Girl Gone Bad, the original. I smelled this. I was at an exercise class, like a high intensity interval class. I smelled a perfume in this little class and I thought it smelled amazing. And I kind of tracked it down to this one woman, and I asked her after class, and she said, oh, she told me it was Good Girl Gone Bad. And I remember thinking, oh, I gotta let my spouse know, I gotta let Pat know. I definitely want to put that on the Christmas wish list. And Christmas rolled around and I got a bottle and absolutely love it. This has a ton of white flowers in it, and some white flowers can be difficult for me. You know, it's got jasmine tuberose, it has May rose, it has narcissus. But what makes this fragrance, what gives this fragrance a lot of character and separates it from the pack is this osmanthus in it, which gives fragrances an apricot-y kind of a flair. So this has osmanthus and it has a very heavy cedar note. I pick up a very clean, dry cedar. So the combination of all those notes to me makes this very intoxicating, beautiful, unique fragrance. It's got a very light amber, so it gives it a little bit of a sweetness, but it's in no way a gourmand. It's a slightly sweet white floral with some woody notes. And every time I wear this, every time, without exception, someone says, you smell so good, what are you wearing? And in fact, a couple of my work friends have purchased this fragrance just smelling it on me. A beautiful fragrance in my collection. A lot of these fragrances are actually kind of vintagey. The next one is a fragrance that I never wear. You can see it's still in the box, and I only opened it just to make sure that the fragrance was legit. I got a great deal on the original Samsara. Someone had it sealed in the package. My grandma Jan used to wear this. She's no longer around, but this was her signature scent. And I remember smelling it and saying, oh, Grandma, you smell so good. What is that? And she said, oh, honey, it's Samsara. And she had a little teeny tester with her purchase, and she gave the tester to me, and I never forgot it. I bought this because, actually, first of all, I got it because it reminds me of my grandma. And secondly, it's a classic, even though I never wear it. Oh my gosh, you know, I just smell it and I immediately think of my grandma. My sweet, lovely grandma giving me a hug. Yeah, it's just good memories. This is a sandalwood, I want to say iris, maybe ylang-ylang, peach, kind of this, it smells like 80s, 90s concoction. Very strong. Some people might think it smells a little bit vintagey, but it has that scent profile of very strong, bold fragrance that was the typical type of fragrance that was made in the 80s and the 90s. And who knows if I'll ever wear it, but I absolutely love to have fragrances in my collection that remind me of beloved people from my past that may not be around. And sometimes just smelling the bottle is the only thing I have that kind of brings them back to life again. And it's definitely Samsara. Now, on the same note, I used to have a big bottle of White Shoulders, and that's a fragrance that you can get at literally like the drugstore, Walgreens. And that was my other grandma's signature scent. That was Grandma Emma, and that was the only thing she ever wore. And I thought it smelled so great, and I loved going to her house. And she'd even have the little powder puff, and she'd have the soap out, and she always wore White Shoulders. It's such a pretty fragrance. And when she passed on, I remember buying a bottle because I would just, every once in a while, I wanted to remember Grandma, how she smelled, and I would spray it. And then about maybe 6 months ago, it was kind of teetering on the edge of in my closet, and it fell down when I was reaching for something, so I need to replace the bottle. But I'm definitely going to get another bottle of that. It's a beautiful white flower. Let me see what the notes are here. Let me look up the notes. Wow, so it says I can get a 2.4 ounce bottle on Max Aroma for $16. But, so it had aldehydes, or it has aldehydes, orange flower, green notes, peach, lilac, gardenia, tuberose, jasmine, lily, a gajillion notes typical of a fragrance from the past, kind of like the kitchen sink of flowers. Oh my gosh, interesting. There's civet in there. I wouldn't have guessed that. Oak moss, amber, benzoin, sandalwood. It was just kind of a real pretty, sweet, it was definitely a sweet white floral with a little bit of soapiness. And definitely going to get another bottle of that because I like, just for nostalgia reasons, I like to have fragrances around that remind me of loved ones in my life. And on that note, let's go for a fragrance that reminds me of my godmother. I bought this. Now this is Shalimar EDT. I own many flankers of Shalimar. I have the EDT, I have Shalimar Cologne EDT, which I love. That's still my favorite flanker. I have Shalimar Filtra, and I have Shalimar Millésime Vanilla Planifolia. Oh my gosh, mwah. That one has been discontinued, or I think it was just a limited release, which was a crime because it's a beautiful fragrance. And I bought the EDT because my godmother, Shirley, who was one of the nicest people to ever walk the earth, Shalimar, the EDP, was her signature scent. And I remember seeing Shirley, and she was such a sweet lady. Of course, we're huggers. My family we're all huggers in my family. And giving Aunt Shirley a big hug, and she always smelled wonderful. She had, you recognize Shalimar. It's not a fragrance that you forget. You know it when you smell it. And I thought she smelled lovely. And so I ended up buying, I tried the EDP. Boy, that was too animalic. I got, this heavy, kind of a burned fuel smell. And so I got the EDT instead. The EDT has still that animalic, leathery, funky, burned rubber kind of a thing, but it's not as bad as the EDP. And the EDP is lovely when it dries down, like hours into the dry down. It's gorgeous. I can't get to the dry down. It's just not my thing. But just a classic fragrance that, in my opinion, is a masterpiece. It's timeless. It's classic. And there will always be people who will have this as their signature scent. And again, I smell it, and it brings back these really, really good memories. Okay, the next one, we're going to go back to one that is marketed towards men. This is a fragrance so I had a high school and college sweetheart, and when he was in high school and college, he was always very dapper, but there wasn't, like I said, there wasn't much available. Prior to 2000, at least in my opinion, there were slim pickings for men with regards to fragrances, and I know what my boyfriend wore at the time. But he went off to law school, I went off to do my thing, and we ended our relationship very, very amicably. He was a lovely human being, is a lovely human being to this day. And it wasn't until maybe 10 years later, I was in Houston, and he was already through law school, and he's quite the go-getter. And at the age of 26, had started his own law firm. I was still very poor in school, working on my degree, working on my profession, and we got together for lunch. And I remember seeing him, giving him a big hug, and thinking, wow, you smell really good. What is that fragrance you're wearing? And the fragrance he was wearing was the original Santal by Creed, another Creed fragrance. And this is just I still think this smells so good. This is a spicy sandalwood fragrance. It has some juniper in here. I want to say lavender, cinnamon, just a really unique, well done fragrance for men that I just found smelt spectacular. And I remember at the time I couldn't afford it to give it to my boyfriend at the time, which is my husband right now. So it was maybe 5-10 years later, I was able to save up enough money and get him a bottle of Santal for Christmas. And Pat's really picky, and he loved it, and I loved him wearing it. This is just a really sophisticated, to me, this is just a man that is just super put together. I always tell Pat that this is the fragrance that I think that James Bond would wear. That just kind of personifies Creed Santal. He disagrees. He thinks that James Bond would wear a green iris tree. This is a gorgeous, classic, refined, and timeless fragrance that I bought because I had smelled on somebody else, and I'm happy. Okay, now we're gonna go back to a fragrance that I don't wear that much. I still love it, but it is probably the fragrance I compliment people the most. I see these Instagram stories, or I'll see these YouTube stories, and people are so sick and tired of Baccarat 540 because they smell it everywhere. I don't smell it everywhere. I know very few people who want to spend that kind of money on that fragrance. I have I only have one real frag head who enjoys fragrances like I do, and doesn't mind spending a couple $100s on a fragrance that she loves. Shout out to my friend Nabila. But we have a lot of fun when we're together, when we get to work together, because we're always guessing what each other wore. But the fragrance that I do smell a lot, I smell Chanel Chance Eau Tendre. I smell this very frequently. And I smelled this originally. I was at a farmer's market, and I was like looking at homemade jewelry, and I knew it was the woman, I knew it was the gal behind the counter or behind the table, and I said, "What are you wearing? You smell so good." And she said it was Chanel Chance. I said, "Well, which one?" I knew at the time there was like the original, and then there was the Eau Fraiche and the Eau Tendre. And I didn't want to get it wrong. And I go, "What color is it?" And she says, "In the pink bottle," and I knew. So I bought the bottle, and I wore this a lot. For the first couple years I had it. And then a nurse that I work with absolutely loved this fragrance, and so I gave her my bottle. And then I loved smelling it on her. She would come to work and she'd smell so good. Nancy, if you're watching, hello, I miss you. But I bought myself a second bottle, and I still, even though I don't wear it as much, this is a great spring and summertime fragrance. Actually, it's one of the very few fragrances I would wear year-round. The performance isn't great. It doesn't cut through the real tough Midwestern winters we have here when it gets really cold. So it's really kind of a spring and summer scent. I just think it's super appealing. It's got, florals in it. I want to say like jasmine, hyacinth, maybe heliotrope, and it has quince and grapefruit. So it's kind of this really nice, a little bit sweet, a little bit fruity, a little bit juicy and tart, and it just comes together to make a gorgeous fragrance. I still smell it to this day. I think I smelled it on an ultrasound tech that works with me. And I said, "Jill, are you wearing Chanel Chance in the pink bottle?" She said, "Yep." I said, "You smell really good." So this is the most, if I compliment somebody on what they're wearing, 9 out of 10 times, if it's a female, it's going to be this one right here. Easy reach, easy wear fragrance. Ooh, let's see. I don't want this to be a marathon, but I do want to get some of these. There's actually fragrances in here that I've never talked about before, ever. And the next one, let's talk about that one. The next one is a Chanel fragrance, and one of my colleagues, this was her signature scent, and it is Coco Chanel. And I would go into her office, and her office would smell so good, and I'd say, "Beth, what are you wearing?" And she told me it was Coco Chanel. This was years ago, and I remember sniffing it like in a department store and thinking, "Whoa, I don't really think that is me, but maybe in a few years I'll get the fragrance." And I bought it a couple years ago. I remember thinking, right before I started my channel, I bought this fragrance, and I still, to this day, have never formally worn it. It's one of the very few fragrances that I do not ever wear, but I haven't decluttered it, and I'm not going to declutter it because it is a classic. It is a masterpiece. I'm waiting for me to grow into it. I think I tried it one time when I first got it. Of course, like the bonehead that I am, I did that in the summer. Oh man, big mistake. This thing is so strong. It has so many spices. This is a heavy, I want to say this is from the 80s. It smells like a perfume from the 80s. It is a heavy hitter. It's like a spicy clove, amber, sandalwood, rose fragrance. This will knock you out if you spray this too much. It is heavy, particularly in the beginning. But I think I really love it in the dry down when I'm smelling someone's sillage. That's when I really love this fragrance. I think it's just so hard because of the clove. The clove, and I want to say maybe has coriander in it. There's something, and it is a touch animalic. There is something animalic in here with the cloves. It just is too much. It's not crisp fragrance. But I appreciate it for the classic that it is, and I love smelling it on somebody else, and maybe one day I'll actually grow into it, and it's going to be in the wintertime. The next one is a fragrance that I just talked about in my summer florals not that long ago, and it is Miracle by Lancome. This smells very similar. It's in the same fragrance category as Chanel Chance Eau Tendre. They're both these very likable, fruity, light fruity florals. I think the main flower in here is magnolia and probably freesia, but this is a slightly soapy, fruity floral, and I've said it before, but to me, this is a watered down version of Pure Poison. So a diluted version of Pure Poison. Pure Poison on me is strong. That thing is a powerhouse. I do not wear it. I haven't worn it in the past month. It's been hot here, and it's too strong. It's too strong, too heavy for me. This is very, very easy to wear. And let me tell you the story. And I smelled it on a friend of mine who came to my house a couple years ago. And I was reaching down to grab something, and I kind of went past her hair. And I said, "Oh, Raza, what are you wearing? You smell so good." And she said it was Miracle. And I knew that I had to buy a bottle. Very easy reach, likable. I have the smaller bottle, which is perfect for me. And as long as you don't overspray it, you could easily wear this to work, and it would be great. The next fragrance is a fragrance that I smelled on a man, another colleague at work, for the purposes of confidentiality. We're going to call him Bob. We'll call him Bob. So Bob is a very quiet person. He never talks. He kind of, I could work with him the whole day, and he would never say 2 words. He would go to his office and do his thing. But it was on a Saturday. It's a bare bones staffing, so you're usually working with just one other person. And I remember Bob walked by my office, and I got this amazing aroma. And I'm like, it can't possibly be Bob. Bob, there's no way Bob could smell that good. And I said, "Bob, what? Are you wearing a cologne? You smell so good. What is that?" And he said, "It's pizza." I said, No, I'm not smelling pizza. I'm smelling a cologne. Are you wearing a cologne? And he said, it's called Bleu. And at the time, I knew that there were 2 fragrances with the name of Bleu. I knew that there was one by Chanel, and I also knew that there was one by Bulgari. And I was like, well, who makes it? What does the bottle look like? I need to get that because you smell amazing, and I want to get it for Pat. And he said, it's in a square bottle. I think it's Chanel. I said, great, that's all I need to know. And so this was one of Pat's Christmas presents that year. And I still, to this day, think this is a phenomenal fragrance. This is another one, in my opinion. This is a masterpiece. This is gorgeous. I still see people post this on Instagram. I still absolutely love it. I'm sure people have moved on and think it's boring and icky. I love it. This is so refreshing. It's got the grapefruit, and I know there's mint, and there's probably lemon, and I'm sure there's cedar, and just a little bit, I mean a touch of pepperiness. There's always pepper in a men's fragrance, but this is just so freaking gorgeous, and I absolutely love it. When I smell it on a man, I think that smells so dang great, and I loved it when Pat would wear it all the time. His fragrance collection has gotten bigger, so he doesn't wear this as much, but this is a really, when he wears it, I can recognize it. I absolutely love it and love smelling it on other people. Okay, I want to wind this down. I want this to get long, but I have to talk about this fragrance because this was kind of the original fragrance that I smelled on another person, and it became my signature scent for 10 years. And I still remember to this day where I was, exactly where I was when I smelled it, and the circumstances surrounding it. And it is Fleurissimo. I've spoken about this on my wedding day video. This is a classic beauty. This was Princess Grace of Monaco. This was her wedding day fragrance. In fact, Creed created this fragrance just for Grace and her wedding day. And it wasn't until years later that they mass manufactured it and made it available to the general public. It is a very unique fragrance, but I was in Washington, D.C. doing a sabbatical, and I was there for about 6 to 8 weeks, and I was, a broke student as per usual, and I stayed in a kind of a snazzy part of town. I stayed in DuPont Circle. If you know anything about Washington, D.C., DuPont Circle is kind of a snazzy area. And I was there by myself. I couldn't afford really going out to eat a whole bunch. So I would just I rented a little apartment at the time. I would make dinner, maybe a sandwich or something. But as a special treat to myself, I would venture down. Everything was in walking distance. I was really downtown DuPont Circle. I would go to a nice restaurant or a restaurant and pick up a dessert and bring it home. And then I would kind of eat that dessert over a couple days to stretch out the luxury. And I went to the Cheesecake Factory. I laughed at that, like that was a luxury restaurant, but at the time it was It was kind of new. And so I popped into this restaurant and I ordered a cheesecake to go. It was a tres leche cheesecake. And as I was walking out the door, I was just hit with the most beautiful sillage, this aroma. It was obviously a perfume. And I remember, I have a really good nose. I can kind of pinpoint where smells are coming from. That could be good and bad. But anyways, I pinpointed this fragrance to the bar and I walked over. I could tell who it was. And this beautiful woman, she's probably, I was in my 20s. She was in her 30s probably, just dressed to the nines. This lady was class personified. Her hair was perfect. She was like dressed in some killer work suit. And she was beautiful and having a conversation with someone. And I waited politely and I said, "Excuse me, you smell so good. Do you mind if I ask you what you're wearing?" And she just lit up. She had this big grin on her face, smile, and she said, "Oh, it's Fleurissimo by Creed." And then without skipping a beat, she told me the story about Princess Grace and the story behind the fragrance. And I remember just got married. That's right, I just got married. My Pat was still back where we lived. He was finishing up training, so we're both still kind of very rubbing nickels together to get by. And I remember saving my money. It took me a while. Saving my money, putting a little bit aside, a little bit aside, a little bit aside. I think it took me a year or two. And I finally bought a bottle of the Fleurissimo. And it was my scent. It was pretty much my signature scent for 10 years. This is a very unique fragrance and it's timeless in my opinion. I don't want to wear it all the time, and to me this kind of is a spring fragrance or a beautiful wedding fragrance. I would wear to a wedding, or I would wear if I was a bride. I could definitely see myself wearing a fragrance like this if I was a bride. It is a strong white flower with a heavy green note. I want to say it's violet leaf, and there's also, so it's very green. I'm really not a green person. So this is a clean, soapy floral with a heavy saltiness, and that saltiness comes from ambergris, which tends to be very musky and salty, but it is prominent in this fragrance, and it's still very strong in the dry down. This to me is nuclear, and this is my second bottle. I bought a tester because it's very expensive still, and I saved about $100. I kind of kick myself because it just drives me nuts when when the testers don't have a lid. But anyways, the lid is green, but it's beautiful. Like I said, I haven't worn it maybe in the past month. I wore it in the spring a couple times and posted to Instagram. And I actually just sent this, I've been doing a couple of sample swaps of late with other people that I've met on Instagram. And I sent my friend Obi several samples. Like we made a list of what we wanted to try. And I think I sent her like 8 to 10 samples, and she got back to me. She DM'd me immediately. She said, "Creed Fleurissimo is absolutely stunning and I must have a bottle." So out of all the fragrances that I sent her, she was just blown away by Fleurissimo. It's not for everybody, and it's absolutely not blind buy. You can't blind buy this, but it's a beautiful, timeless classic. And I have this in my collection now because I smelled it on a lovely human being many years ago. Okay, I may have to edit some of this out. I'm getting a little long-winded. I have 4 fragrances to talk about. Let's talk about this one. So the next one is another oldie. This is Knowing by Estee Lauder. My mother was given a bottle of this when I was growing up, and it wasn't my mother's thing. She wore a fragrance. I'll talk about it in a minute. I actually have it in the bucket. And it just kind of sat on her dresser. She never wore it because it wasn't really my mom's thing. But I remember kind of going into my mom's room and just kind of sneaking a spray and just thinking that I was just bad A. I mean, I was like, man, this smells so good. Because I think the muse for this fragrance was Pauline Porzakova, and I just thought, oh my God, she was just like the most beautiful human being ever. And then, let's say, fast forward several years, at least a decade. I am now living in St. Louis, the town that I live in now. And I'm at Barnes & Noble's, and I'm checking out, I'm getting a bunch of books. I like to get books for family members. During the Christmas season, usually there's somebody that's wrapping the books, and they are there under the auspices of a charity, so you can go have your stuff wrapped, and for a small donation, and it'll go to some charitable organization, they'll wrap your books, and then you have your Christmas gifts already wrapped. Well, I remember going and taking it to this beautiful woman. She was middle-aged, dressed to the nines at Barnes & Noble, and bringing her like a stack of books to wrap, and she smelled so good, and I knew right away what it was, but I asked her anyway. I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, you smell so lovely. What are you wearing?" And she said, "Oh, it's Estee Lauder. It's knowing but Estee Lauder." And I literally, after my books were wrapped, I went straight to the mall and picked up a bottle, and that was about 10 years ago. This is that second bottle. I think my first bottle, I was a ding-a-ling and didn't store it properly. It went kind of bad, but for just nostalgia, I bought a second bottle. I only wear this in December, and maybe it's because of maybe the scent memory I have with that lovely woman who was wrapping my books, but this to me is a Christmas time fragrance. This is a December fragrance. I had to dig it out of storage for this video, but it's still, when I smell it, classic. It's a typical 80s, 90s fragrance that has like 10 billion notes in it. I think I looked it up one time. It has over 50 notes, but it's like a sheep. It's a rose, sheep, oak moss, really, really good memories. I probably will only wear it a couple times in the winter. So this is my December fragrance when I'm wearing red or black. It's my knowing. The next one I'm going to talk about real quickly is still in a box. This was the fragrance that my mom wore. My mother is from a very small town in Illinois. Even though I grew up in Texas, she met my dad when they were both at the University of Illinois. My dad is a college professor. He was getting his education there, and my mom was like a secretary, and she was really, really young. And they met and moved to Texas, and I was raised in Texas, in Houston specifically. My mom still had that, she grew up, didn't have a lot where she grew up, and still had that kind of small town girl who didn't have a lot of money and never wanted to spend money on herself. And her fragrance that she wore, literally, I just remember my mom wearing this. She wears something different now. But when I grew up, my mother wore Chantilly. And I still don't have it out of the box. But I get fragrances because they remind me of loved ones. I think I've already gone through several. But I always want to have a fragrance of this. My mom, thank God, is a very young 70-year-old, and she's very healthy. And I wanted to have a bottle of her fragrance because it reminded me of my mom when I was growing up, and I wanted to make sure that I got this before it was discontinued or anything like that. I don't know, it's like an ambery, it's a sandalwood, ambery, maybe a touch animalic floral fragrance that I could just recognize from a mile away, and will always, always have this in my collection. That's it, another edition of Poolside Perfumes and Chit Chat with me. Thank you again for sticking around. I hope you guys are enjoying the series, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.